The question that we're really asking here is, what is property, right? So there are two ways of creating property in the world, one of which is the old way of creating property, which is state fiat. The state takes something and says this something is yours. And the new way of creating property, the thing that all the fuss was about, was property that self-certified its own existence. A Bitcoin is a Bitcoin is a Bitcoin, an Ether is an Ether is an Ether. And what we're seeing is this kind of hybrid thing where we're taking the mechanisms of self-sovereign, self-certifying property, and we're using them to carry state-issued or state-controlled assets. And to be honest, I think we're going to have to make a decision pretty soon about what the role of sovereign or self-sovereign assets is. Are we just accepting that it's just a database and it's at the service of moving around IBM stock and moving around dollars, and that's just what you do with it now? Or are these self-sovereign assets the things which are created without a state, moved around without a state, secured without a state? Are those actually the point of this thing? And we start looking at, well, what happens if you do something like full company and corporation on chain without any state blessing it, or some kind of very lightweight thing like you have in, say, Wyoming? And the dialogue around this kind of stuff is the core cypherpunk dialogue, which goes back into the 80s, maybe early 90s. Is public key encryption a fundamental breakthrough in human liberty, or is it simply just a way of putting a signature on a piece of data that somebody holds you accountable for? My gut feeling on this is it's probably 5 or maybe even 6, 7 years since we really pulled all of this stuff out and had a proper think about it. The Ethereum cypherpunk consensus is very, very, very weak. Oh yeah, everybody agrees it's cypherpunk. But what does that really mean in confrontation with increasingly belligerent states with, more and more reach, and in the age of AI and everything else? We ought to do some real philosophical deep diving on this, because we are in serious danger of having an entire generation of Americans who are just like, oh yeah, crypto, you mean dollar tokens, without any awareness that there was ever anything before dollar tokens. In the same way that we used to have people that came into crypto and just like, oh yeah, NFTs, that's what crypto is. And you're like, well, there was something before. And so I think we're going through another one of these generational transitions, but this one I think is so big and so radically shifts power towards the state end of the spectrum. We're going to have to really put our heads together and have a think about what the response is. Maybe it's time for some kind of online conference or something. But I think, I don't have an immediate answer. I really need to think about this.